Hello, and welcome to another episode of the DevLab podcast. Today's episode is titled Inside Global Cyber Culture, Communication and Emerging Threats with BAE Systems. Today's guest is Berenike, a senior security consultant and cyber threat intelligence analyst with a background that's anything but typical. From growing up in a home filled with music and political debate to leading humanitarian projects in Costa Rica, she's brought diplomacy, cultural fluency, and technical expertise together in a role that spans global threat research and cyber capacity building. She's part of the cybersecurity team at BAE Systems, where she works at the intersection of strategy, technology, and international collaboration. So welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much, Phil. Absolutely love being here. I'm gonna say the truth. It's the first recorded podcast video experience I have. I hope my German brain doesn't, abandon me halfway through. Very excited to be here. Thanks for the invite.
Well, we're very excited to have you. No, don't worry about that. I'm sure you're going to be an absolute natural at this. Like, as we've already discussed, you've got that very varied background. I'm sure it's prepared you for anything and everything that we'll discuss on today's call. So look, I think a good place to start in any of these podcasts is just getting to know you a little bit more. So look, you didn't grow up necessarily with technology or in an environment that was super tech focused, but you found your way into it through diplomacy and crisis simulations. Could you talk us through that journey and kind of what made cyber click for you in the end?
Good punchline. Absolutely. That's very right. My background is very unconventional. So I really come from a family of musicians originally, and actually trained as a classical singer. But did so at an incredibly international UNESCO music school. And then after school, I won a scholarship by the German government that took me to Costa Rica, where I led humanitarian projects in quite resource-strained environments. And that is really what started in me, this love for diplomacy, this passion for languages, on living between the cultures, living between the countries, which is something I obviously still do today. And that's also where I felt like I first learned how to influence decisions and build trust and really deliver change under pressure, which are all things that I really need and value in my consulting work today. So then after that, I interned at the UN and at the German embassy in New York. But it wasn't until a crisis simulation, a cyber crisis simulation at university, where I felt like, everything clicked together. I felt like, oh, wow, this feels like modern diplomacy. Cyberspace doesn't have borders. There's so many stakeholders here that need to be involved, so many cultures, so many languages to be spoken. And then, it's this very strategic and fast-paced thinking, which is needed in the cyber world. And so, I felt like this was it. This was where I, felt I could have a real impact. And going from there, I trained again at Europol, at PwC France. I learned from a lot of very, very talented people. And then I wrote my master's thesis with NATO on military cyber threats to space assets, actually. And then I was in a very lucky position that during my master's in Paris, one of my professors, my favorite professor, was a director in the UK government. And when I asked him where I could do that, namely digital intelligence, he recommended BAE Systems. And that's where I am today. And that's where I can bring all of these experiences and learnings together. And I haven't looked back ever since.
Fantastic. Excellent. And look, we're really going to delve into that experience at BAE as we get into today's pod. But where I wanted to kind of start, our follow-ups is I think there's a perception out there that, the world of cybersecurity is a very technical field. People think firewalls, people think pen testing, people think hacking and all of the kind of code and all of that sort of stuff that comes with it. And that is obviously a huge part of it. But I think your background shows how much soft power, cultural intelligence matter. So how do you think those kind of fields of diplomacy and cyber threat analysis intersect?
So I think you made a really good point there. People wanting to work in cyber is inherently technical. Ever since I am doing this job, I am uptraining and upskilling massively. I'm doing one certificate after the other. Without the technical knowledge, it's really hard to do good consulting here and understand what really the pain points of the clients are. So that is the basis, really, that everyone ought to have. But the reality is the cyber world is not just about code. It's about people, it's about relationships, it's about trust. um, Technical tools really are not sustainable, or are not enough when you want sustainable change. So, look, I work in cyber capacity building mostly, and here we really work across political systems, across national histories, and personal relationships. And it's a lot like what I studied in international negotiations. One really needs to listen and read between the lines and build this long term trust. And even, threat intelligence is cultural. I started at BAE as a cyber threat intelligence analyst, and I realized quite quickly on that how a risk is perceived in one country might be completely different in another based on, what I said earlier. So all of my projects these days start with me understanding the cultural context of the beneficiaries.
What does cyber capacity building actually look like on the ground? And what kind of challenges do you walk into?
Yeah, so it's really interesting. So technically, cyber capacity building means that we are asked to come into a country, and there we figure out, what they're doing well, what is going not so well, and what their greatest security gaps are, so we can, help them seal this gap. That sounds, simple enough, but on the ground, it's not only technical, it's practical, it's human, and it's often quite complex. So you're side by side with ministries and regulators and technical teams, and often that happens in places where cyber is not yet a core priority. So resources might be stretched, the ownership and the budgets can be quite fragmented, and, cyber is often seen as someone else's job. I think that is one challenge. And maybe another challenge is finding the right pacing. So often we are expected to deliver value immediately, but we also want to find something that is sustainable and locally owned. And that really requires effort and sitting down, listening actively, and really great teamwork internally as well, instead of, just imposing a one size fits all solution onto the client. So I recently had the opportunity to do this when I developed the first energy sector cyber strategy for a key ally to the UK in the Middle East. And that was, a real life example of how tackling all of these challenges led to a scalable outcome in a team and with the client.
Fantastic. Yeah, thank you so much for sharing. Um, so look, you speak 6 languages, which is, you know, for a start, incredible. As someone who speaks one and kind of a second, to speak six is incredible. So has that shaped the way that you collaborate across teams, cultures, or technical disciplines? I suppose for one, it does just mean that you can communicate on a deeper level with more people. But even beyond that, does it really influence the work that you do?
Yeah, thank you. Absolutely. Absolutely. I have found that speaking someone's language really breaks down barriers. So it's not just, about words, it's about connection, showing that you want to understand, switching into their mode of thinking. It helps, building trust and showing respect, and also navigating different leadership styles. And oftentimes it just, avoid things getting lost in translation, which is all crucial to delivering good work. And if you wanted to hear, a good example, I once had to facilitate interviews across, 3 different continents, and had an in-house translator, but also was sitting with a client. And just because I was speaking language itself, it really helped me to make sure that everything that went through this translation channel was actually what we needed to hear or what they wanted to say. And if I hadn't had this capability, I think things would have not gone as smoothly that day. So I guess like in cyber, where so much depends on cooperation, that kind of fluency really makes collaboration quite smooth and also way more inclusive. So this is, whether I'm working with technical teams of beneficiaries globally, or with policymakers in Europe, or, just technical consultants inside of the industry. I feel like it's not just helpful for me. Oftentimes, it's quite essential.
Yeah, absolutely right. In any workplace, on any project, communications and clarity of communication is absolutely crucial, and particularly, that leads us very well and very nicely on to our next question. So thank you for the great segue. You're working across an international portfolio, you're often dealing with complex, fast-moving threat environments. And aside from leveraging those language skills, what are some of the other challenges that you face in operating in such a global, high-stakes space, and how do you overcome those?
I would say the biggest challenge really is complexity. So when we do these projects, we often have to manage teams across time zones. Um, Team members grew up in different cultural backgrounds and have hence, different communication styles or different um, preferences of how they like to work. And then it's also, moving people across borders and resources across borders. And oftentimes we're also just faced with national sensitivities around like geopolitics or legal frameworks. And it's just like not simple, and it requires great team structures and mutual support amongst the colleagues to handle this. And I reckon also in the spirit of complexity is context. So, for example, a ransomware attack, right, might look the same on paper, but impact on and the response are really shaped by what exists on the ground. So, for example, the local systems on the ground or the policies or also the trust network between the people. Do people have a point of contact to reach out to? Do they know what to do? So, when I'm analyzing a country's threat landscape and its incident response capability, I really have to keep an eye on the technical reality on the ground, but also not eye on the human reality on the ground. So it's quite complex, but I feel like the more complex it is, the more rewarding it is in the end as well, when things actually fall into place and everything comes together in, one big working solution. It feels like very meaningful work, and it feels like it does matter.
Fantastic. Yeah, thank you so much. And yeah, it all makes total sense, and certainly aligns to I think some of the challenges that we see on a more localized level when not working across those international borders, but certainly amplified by those cultural differences that you've kind of highlighted. I guess to really now focus in more on the tech side of things. So look, cyber threats are getting harder to pin down, right? Whether that's ransomware, deep fakes, or attacks on physical infrastructure. And I guess one of the most challenging parts of your job is almost thinking ahead, right, and predicting,
Mm.
because ultimately, often we don't know what we don't know, and really, it's about trying to get ahead of these things. So, what threats do you think we're not paying enough attention to right now?
Yeah, I think that a massive challenge is still the security of operational technology. Um, and I'm saying that particularly because I have been working now for the past 2 years on this big energy sector project. And, sectors like this, energy, or other, critical national infrastructure sectors are critical for the day-to-day functioning of, a normal citizen's life. And when we think about operational technology, and if you think about the CIA triad, they were designed with availability in mind over security or integrity. So they were never designed to be connected to the internet um, to the extent that they are today. And hence, without those specific security measures in mind, and they're, increasingly exposed, for example, through remote access solutions. And it might sound dated, but this has been the case ever, especially since the pandemic. And that really widened the attack surface for threat actors. And what I see in my work is that in contrast, the organizational structures and the skill sets to manage that risk and, OT in general are still not established consistently enough and not sufficiently resourced. It is, still a blind spot that can be quite easy to exploit and really hard to, secure, or even worse, to recover from. So that's one thing. And then secondly, honestly, it's the less glamorous stuff. We're still missing the basics. It's not always the flashy zero day or the latest AI tool that's causing the mischief. It's more about, the majority of breaches really still happen through very basic, very well-known gaps. That could be, misconfigured servers or internet exposed devices or services, or say VPNs without multi-factor authentication, or reuse credentials that are, achieved through phishing. It's basic stuff, and attackers don't need to be clever if we keep leaving the back door open. So they really favor low effort and high reward routes using what is already out there, and exploiting misconfigurations instead of, creating and burning bespoke exploits. I think, we really need to stop chasing these latest buzzwords and rather focus on getting the foundations right, even if it's, not the most exciting part of the job.
Yeah, fantastic. Like, I think really, really interesting. I think, particularly with OT, one of the pressures at the moment is, governments, companies are rushing to try and upgrade all this technology for, as you say, efficiency and to
Yeah,
leverage AI
absolutely.
and to leverage all these things. But then to also factor in the security that adds cost and, it's where are corners being cut and all of these different things that we really need to be very conscious of.
Yeah.
And I suppose the second point is really, where your work as a translator, as someone who can educate and someone who can help different businesses to get the process right is where that really comes in. And again, great segue onto the next question, because what I wanted to focus on next was, that particular challenge of bridging the gap between the highly technical and the non-technical. So how do you approach that translation work and get the process right with people?
So I realized early on in my international life, that every stakeholder's perspective matters, and it does so in its own way. So I found that you start by listening. You really understand what matters to them. Could be, for example, risk or reputation or continued business operations. Then you connect the dots between the cyber threats and those real world impacts. I think it's really about making it relevant and shaping. So I avoid fear based language, and then instead focus on getting stories and real life threat intelligence scenarios that I use. Um, I find that simple visuals really help, and bringing people into the conversation to co-create the solution instead of pushing it on them. It's really a two-way street. If we want better outcomes, we need to speak the same language.
Fantastic. Excellent. And, with that language in mind, and again, going back, calling back to our earlier point around the importance of clarity and communication and why you're well placed to ensure there is that clarity. Um, let's focus on the other side. Let's focus on the misunderstandings. So which part of the threat landscape do you think is the most misunderstood, either by the public or even within the industry?
It's a really good question. I made sure that before answering this question, I checked a little bit back with my colleagues as well, to see what they were thinking, both on the techie side and the consulting side. Um, I think I think two things come to mind really here that stand out for me as being the most misunderstood things. So the first one I think really is AI, such a buzzword. Um, it's often presented as this autonomous threat, right? That will discover 0 days and, outpace defenders overnight. In reality, today's AI is much more limited. It's quite good at replicating our known patterns, but it's not, creating entirely new ones. It's not independently thinking or innovating. The bigger risk, I think, isn't rogue AI. It's people overestimating these capabilities and underestimating the need for sound security fundamentals. That's one thing. And then I think a second thing that I worked a lot on in the past is supply chains and organizational complexity. So we really spend a lot of time worrying about external actors, but I find that so many risks are embedded within our own organizations. So that could be in processes, or could be in dependencies, or could just be in assumptions. So the questions here to pose are really, who owns what, who is accountable, and what is actually running in production. And that can be oftentimes extremely unclear, especially if you think about operational technology environments that might be legacy. So I find that this fog is exactly where attackers thrive. And it's upon organizations themselves to clear it.
Fantastic. Excellent. And I'm sure, look, anyone out there listening in who is in this space, those 2 points probably, rang a few bells and certainly resonated. Yeah, because again, it's something that I've heard as well, when having various conversations with stakeholders in your space. So
Yeah,
look,
yeah.
let's look ahead. Let's talk about what you're excited about. What's next? Is it either in terms of, okay, you're not excited about the threat, but you're excited about the threats that you're going to stop, or just, in more general terms, the evolution of your work at BAE.
So I guess very much in spirit with my character, I'm a big champion for consulting impact that lasts. So I find that latest with the 2023 book, Big Con. I recommend giving it a read, but a critical one. There has been this outcry that we need to move away from a consultancy model that kind of drops in and then delivers an output and then disappears. Instead, I find that we need to come up with truly sustainable solutions. So things that beneficiaries can work with and continue developing once we are gone. So that might be in terms of, deploying frameworks that they can take away, or setting up tools and configuring tools that they then understand how to do it themselves and, do it with the next set of tools, or how to work with those tools. But yeah, making sure that that what we are doing is tailored to the ground. And I think that's particularly important as countries undergo the big transitions ahead. So think, energy transitions or AI or digital infrastructure. These changes are systemic, not just technical, and they really require cyber strategies that are locally owned and adaptable over time. And I'm really grateful to be surrounded by a team that thinks in the same way. So I think a good test here isn't thinking what did we deliver, but it's what can they sustain without you or without us. That's the shift I'd really like to drive. And that's a kind of consultancy legacy I find that matters.
Fantastic. Excellent. And I'm sure, anyone out there looking for a partner, looking for a consultant, should definitely be considering BAE as that partner
Uh,
with, this, this very, well thought out and concise approach to delivery. So, look, we're going to wrap things up with our next question. And I think, look, a good place to end, as ever, is just with some advice, perhaps to the next generation, perhaps to the current generation, right? What's the one message you hope sticks with developers, engineers, or anyone who's interested in the world of cyber from today's conversation?
yeah, I would say, as much as I love tech, you're not just writing code. You're building systems that people rely on for safety and for trust. And that really means understanding the human contacts around the technology. So who is using it, how and why? So bring others into the room, ask questions, and even if it might, feel tedious and time consuming at times, be patient and open to perspectives beyond your own and beyond just the technical. Because, some of the strongest defenses do come from people, their judgment, their awareness, and most of all, their collaboration.
Fantastic. Very well said. Some words to live by there. Berenike, this has been phenomenal. A real whistle stop tour of the world of cyber, and great to find out plenty about your journey as well. Before we do wrap up, is there anything at all that you didn't get the chance to mention, or anything at all else that you did want to share with the audience before we do wrap up for today?
Say using this platform or using this podcast is quite a chance for me, I would say, just to spread these messages, and I'm quite grateful that this exists. Um, I would find it very helpful if people were to reach out, tell me if they identify with these challenges that I mentioned, if they have along their own way and along their own experiences found solutions how to tackle them. I'm also always specifically interested in resistance in projects, things that don't go so well. How have you overcome these challenges? Because oftentimes I find that more so than a problem, it's more like a hint towards what we can and should do better. So if any of you feels encouraged by what I was saying here, and has like a second thought, please do reach out. Please share your experience. I'm a strong opponent of, siloed collaboration. I feel like too much is held back, where we could share way more knowledge and just become better as an industry. So yeah, feel free to reach out, and I'm very open for any conversation.
Fantastic. Great way to end, because community is absolutely something that we're always promoting on this podcast, whether that be for graduates first getting into their role or more experienced technologists. Communicating, working together, sharing ideas, sharing knowledge is absolutely one of the core themes that we see running through all of these pods. So thank you so much for sharing that at the end. Look, all that leaves me to do is just thank you, Berenike, for joining us today. So thank you very much.
Thank you too, Phil. This has been awesome. Yeah, I hope I did a good job on my first one. Looking forward to the next ones to come. And yeah, great chatting with you, really.
Yeah, you did a fantastic job. You're very much welcome back. I'm sure you'll land a few more podcasts off the back of this one, I'm sure. And look, so thank you as well to our audience. Thank you to everyone listening in as ever. Please do like, share, subscribe, check out the podcast description. So yeah, thanks once again, and we shall see you next time.